When we hear the word Renaissance, many of us tend to think of great art. I certainly do. But the spirit of the Renaissance was first fully articulated in the movement known as Humanism. As a way of understanding the world and man's place within it, humanism informed nearly all aspects of Renaissance thought and practice. Indeed, to know humanism is to know the Renaissance. Because of this, I will spend the entire lecture in describing the former so as to better understand the latter. First and foremost, humanism was a religious and intellectual movement that, through the study of classical and early Christian authors, sought a keener understanding of man's relationship to God. It believed that universal principles like freedom and human dignity, not to mention the pursuit of happiness, were not incompatible with the teachings of Jesus Christ. Whilst not ignoring his divine nature, humanists emphasized Christ's humanity and saw man as the jewel in God's crown. Human beings, therefore, were a worthy subject of study and analysis, a belief that lies at the very heart of the humanist enterprise. Now, broadly speaking, Renaissance humanism can be divided into two tendencies. In Italy, there emerged what historians call Civic humanism, which traced its origins to the 14th century in the writings of Francesco Petrarch, known as the father of humanism. North of the Alps, in places like Germany, England and the Netherlands, Renaissance humanism is referred to as Christian or Northern humanism, although the differences between it and Civic humanism are slight, to say the least. I will defer a discussion of Christian humanism until later and will now focus on the Civic humanists of Italy. They were a diverse group, but tended to share the following characteristics. They revered the classical era and disdained the medieval, dismissing it, as we saw, as the Dark Ages. They venerated the study of history and believed that knowledge of the past, especially the classical past, could provide a guide for men living in the present. Niccolo Machiavelli, who lived from 1469 to 1527, certainly believed in the didactic power of history, and his magnificent guide to acquiring and retaining political power, titled The Prince, is bursting at the seams with historical analogies, mostly taken, incidentally, from classical antiquity or the author's own times. According to Machiavelli, a successful prince must possess the strength and ferocity of a lion and the cunning and stealth of a fox. If a man is to gain and hold on to power, he must act ruthlessly on those occasions that require it. In order to be the master of fortune, he must use whatever virtue he possesses, but never allow his conscience to prevent him from acting in accordance with self-interest or the interests of the state, which he sees as being roughly equivalent. Written during a period of endemic warfare in Italy, The Prince is, above all, a passionate plea for social stability and strong government at a time when both were sorely lacking. Machiavelli is often accused of removing morality from politics and believing that the ends justify the means. Maybe so. But if men are to live in safety and to pursue their interests without the fear of violent death, and if the integrity of the state and private property are to be guaranteed, then perhaps a little ruthless but effective government is to be tolerated. Well, at least according to Machiavelli. Although The Prince's shockingly realistic portrayal of men and politics led to its being banned by the Catholic Church, it is now regarded as a humanist classic and one of the greatest political treatises ever written. Another key component of the humanist project was textual criticism and the study of philology. This, however, could prove to be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it could shed light on early Christian texts or on the wisdom of classical authors. But on the other hand, it could prove subversive of traditional authority, as happened when Lorenzo Valla exposed the donation of Constantine as a medieval forgery, which the papacy had long used to defend its primacy over secular rulers. Unsurprisingly, humanists believed that education should help make men and women free. To achieve this, they favoured the so-called studia humanitatis, that is, branches of knowledge, like history and philosophy, that have human beings as their focus. These, together with the trivium, consisting of grammar, logic and rhetoric, and the quadrivium, that comprised arithmetic, music, geometry and astronomy, provided the basis for a young man's education during the Renaissance. But above all, humanists believed that by reading the Greek and Latin classics, a young man, or young woman if she was wealthy and educated at home, would become a more fully developed human being, a belief that informed higher education until quite recently. Man, as Aristotle once said, is a political animal, and humanists maintained that men best fulfill themselves by being good citizens and by actively participating in their communities. The patriotic and civic ideals of the Greek city-states were held in high regard by humanists, especially if they lived in northern Italy, where city-states were rather thick on the ground. Accordingly, humanists also embraced self-expression and the dignity of individual human beings. In fact, the Renaissance marks a major milestone on the road to the modern cult of individualism, one of the defining features of Western civilization. Unlike their medieval counterparts, Renaissance artists and craftsmen ceased being anonymous. They began to sign their works, and the painter Raphael famously included his own image alongside the great men of classical antiquity in his mural, The School of Athens. Men at the time appeared to crave personal recognition. Some, like Petrarch, actively sought fame, while others, such as the celebrated goldsmith Benvenuto Cellini, went even further and seemed to court notoriety. Perhaps it was because many humanists were self-made men and of relatively humble origins that they sought to redefine nobility. Humanist propaganda tirelessly insisted that the right to hold public office should be based on merit, not on birth. Although not advocates of meritocracy in the modern sense of the word, they seemed to embrace the idea that the best, what Plato and Aristotle called the aristoi, should govern society. And who were the best? Recipients of a rigorous humanist education, of course. To help men succeed and flourish at the highest levels of civic and courtly life, where, after all, the real power in Italy resided, there appeared in 1528 a book that continues to delight its readers almost 5 centuries later. I refer to the Book of the Courtier by Baldassare Castiglione. Sometimes dismissed as a simple guide to good manners, advising its readers not to wipe their noses on their sleeves, for example, or spit on the floors of their hosts. It is, in fact, much more. What it is a beautifully written exposition of Renaissance aspirations that also describes the ideal Renaissance man. Such a man, according to Castiglione, will have received a rigorous humanistic education, possess a ready wit, and be able to charm those around him with the erudite brilliance of his conversation. He will know how to dress appropriately and to advantage, and will be at ease in social situations. He will be strong and athletic and adept at using a sword and other weapons. He will be protective of women and at no time ignore the rules of chivalry. His grace on the dance floor will endear him to the ladies, as will his ability to sing and write poetry. But he must avoid vulgar display and strive to attain that quality Italians like to call sprezzatura, the art of being so skilled in something difficult that it appears easy and effortless, a sort of studied nonchalance, if you will. In short, he must embody the humanistic ideal at its highest formulation, that of a Renaissance or universal man, a self-effacing and cultivated all-rounder, but also self-possessed and equally adept at a broad array of disciplines. The book of the courtier proved to be enormously popular and influential. Not only did it help civilize and refine life at European courts, it also helped civilize and refine Europe. Predictably enough, humanists were patronized by secular and spiritual rulers alike, who needed competent and rigorously educated men to fill their growing bureaucracies and to help them in the art of government and diplomacy. The lists of humanists who served the rich and powerful is long and included, among others, Lorenzo Valla, Desiderius Erasmus, Leonardo Bruni, Thomas More, and Niccolo Machiavelli, to cite but a few of the more celebrated examples. Before concluding this rather brief survey of civic humanism, I would like to make one further and very important point. While the civic humanists of the Renaissance evinced a concern for humanity and the material world that seemed at times to displace their love of God and yearning for the afterlife, very few of them rejected or even thought of questioning Christian orthodoxy. Many were themselves involved in the work of the Church and would have been perplexed and offended had it been suggested to them that their humanism was incompatible with their Christian faith. Indeed, most humanists believed they were serving the interests of Christianity by delving deeper into man's relationship with God. After all, men are made in the image of God, and thus the study of man becomes an almost theological enterprise. Because men can relish the fleeting pleasures of this world and seek earthly happiness and fulfillment, they are not necessarily prevented from looking forward to eternal salvation in the everlasting life of the world to come. Thank you very much.